So everybody knows that Charlie Kirk was not a big fan of black people. He had this weird racist obsession with black people.
These blacks trying to go rob her, happening all the time in urban America. Prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. That's a fact. Black crime is a major issue in our country. Why are you pushing criminal justice reform exactly? Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson, they're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Now, the southern border is, of course, the great replacement. They're trying to replace us demographically. They're trying to make the country less white. It is an anti-white agenda. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
So when Juneteenth, which is generally considered a black American holiday, was made into a federal holiday, of course he had disparaging, negative things to say about it. Brief explanation of Juneteenth. Civil War broke out in the United States in 1861. 1863, Abraham Lincoln proclaims the Emancipation Proclamation, which states that only the slaves in the southern United States, the states that rebelled against the Union, are free. Of course, he had no way to enforce that freedom because he was not in control of the southern states. The Northern Army fights and defeats the Southern Army, freeing the slaves in the South. However, many slave masters brought their slaves to Texas because it was the last stronghold of slavery. Even after the Civil War was over, those slaves in Texas did not know the war was over, did not know there was an Emancipation Proclamation, did not know they were free. They found out they were free when the Northern Army marched into Texas on June 19th, 1865, and let black people in Texas, which was more or less the last holdout of slavery, let them know that they were free. So Kirk spoke against Juneteenth on many occasions using emotional rambling because there's no logic that you could use to dispute or debunk Juneteenth. But what makes it important to note his arguments is that because these are the same arguments that racist white people will use against Juneteenth, or any racist will use against Juneteenth, and to come against black people in America.
So Juneteenth should not be a federal holiday. So Juneteenth, at its best possible reading, is a day to remember news that hit Galveston, Texas about the emancipation of slaves, something that we're all very happy about.
So he tries to feign righteousness here and set himself up so you think of him a certain way. See, I'm not a bad guy. I want the slaves to be freed. That's not what this is about. Then he said this should only be a day of remembrance of the news coming to Texas. But that's a lie. That's not what the day is about. Texas was actually still a slave state under slavery. It wasn't just about the news coming to them. It was about the slaves in Texas being free, Texas being the last stronghold or holdout of slavery. Let's read this. You can get this information anywhere, but this is from history.com, associated with the History Channel about Juneteenth. It says, but in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't instantly free any enslaved people. So when Lincoln established the Emancipation Proclamation, black people in America were not automatically free. In Texas, slavery had continued. So it wasn't just about an announcement of black people being free. It was about actually freeing black people, because we read on, in Texas, slavery had continued as the state experienced no large-scale fighting or significant presence of the Union Army. The Union Army was coming through from the northern part of the United States and freeing slaves during the Civil War. Many enslavers from outside the Lone Star State, from outside of Texas, had moved to Texas, as they viewed it as a safe haven for slavery. So slavery was still going on. It wasn't just about an announcement of being free. It was about actually being free when the Union Army got to Texas. Jumping down in the same article, after the war came to a close in the spring of 1865, when Juneteenth was established, General Granger's arrival in Galveston, Texas, like Kirk just said, that Juneteenth signaled freedom, not just an announcement, but signaled freedom for more than 250,000 enslaved people in Texas. So what Charlie Kirk just said there is a lie. As usual, he lies a lot.
That's not what this is about. We know that this is not what this is about. This is not about the emancipation of slaves. This is instead a new black independence day.
Now he's calling corporations, quote unquote, hyper woke because they want to acknowledge a day that happened in history in America. But of course, Juneteenth is an independence day for black people because black people in America were not independent or free during Independence Day, which was 1776, July 1776, when Independence Day was declared for the United States. Black people were still in slavery then. This is from a speech from Frederick Douglass, the famous black abolitionist. This could be found anywhere, but this is from pbs.org. And this is what he says about the 4th of July. The highlighted part, it says, "This 4th of July is yours," speaking to white people, "not mine." This is during his speech. "You may rejoice, I must mourn." What to the American slave is your 4th of July? Why? Because white people declared independence for America, but black people were still in slavery during that Declaration of Independence, that Independence Day, the 4th of July.
We already have the Black National Anthem. We already have people kneeling at NFL games. We have hyper corporations that are becoming hyper woke in every way imaginable. And now all of a sudden we have a competitor against July 4th.
So he's just making that up. There's no proof that it's a competitor. Where does it say it's a competitor anywhere? It's its own separate holiday.
That's what this is all about. This is about putting a federal holiday to be a competitor against July 4th. Now, if we really wanted to celebrate the emancipation of slaves, we should celebrate September 22nd, 1862, when Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest presidents in American history, emancipated the slaves. Why would we not celebrate that day?
We don't celebrate those times because slaves weren't free during that time. That's easy. It's common sense. I'll read it again. Same history.com article. It says the Emancipation Proclamation, which is what Kirk is talking about, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, had established that all enslaved peoples in the Confederate States, meaning just the southern states, not all states, in rebellion against the Union, which Abraham Lincoln was over the northern states, the Union, shall then thenceforth and forever be free. So the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't for all slaves. It was only for the slaves in the South. That's why we're not going to celebrate the day he proclaimed the Emancipation Proclamation, because all black people in America weren't proclaimed free, just the ones in the South, because he wanted to weaken the South. Abraham Lincoln wanted to weaken the South. Again, but in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation did not instantly free any enslaved people.
Or why don't we celebrate the end of the American Civil War?
Same answer, because black people, all black people in the United States weren't free at that point. It's not hard. Same history.com article, and it reads, although Confederate General Robert E. Lee, the general in the South, the ones that were fighting for slavery, to hold on to slavery, had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia in April 1865. So yes, the end of the Civil War, slavery had remained relatively intact in Texas. So even though the Civil War was over, slavery was still intact. That is until, so that's why you don't celebrate the end of the Civil War, like Charlie Kirk says, because slavery was still intact then. That is until U.S. Major General Gordon Granger stood on Texas soil. This was on June 19th, Juneteenth, the day that black people in America celebrate, and read General Orders Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. That's when all slaves were officially free, on that day, June 16th, which black people in America celebrate as Juneteenth.
That would probably be a pretty important day where we celebrated the official end of the war. Instead, a day in June, on June 19th, is now the new Independence Day. So why would you have a competitor against July 4th?
When did anybody ever deem it the new Independence Day? It's an Independence Day strictly for black people in America's independence. And when did anybody ever deem it a competitor for July 4th? He's simply making things up from his own emotions.
Well, for those of us that know, the current agenda that's happening in our country, which is to try to debase, destroy, and delegitimize American history, of course you would try to find a date as close to July 4th as possible.
Again, that day wasn't picked because it was as close to July 4th as possible. That day, June 19th, was literally the day that the slaves were freed. He wants to speak against Juneteenth so badly, but he doesn't have any legitimate points, so this is the best he can come up with. It's pretty sad.
You would try to get as close to the 4th of July and try to say that's the racist Independence Day. The anti-racist or the Black Independence Day is June 19th.
Again, when has anybody ever said this? He's just making things up.
And look at what the own words are of the people that are pushing forward for Juneteenth. This person by the name of Peniel E. Joseph, who is the head of the Study for Race and Democracy at the LBJ School of Public Policy in Texas, says, quote, Juneteenth still offers a bedrock foundation to make last year's watershed moment of racial and political reckoning into a transformative process that can last. They're saying the private part out loud, that Juneteenth is not about emancipation. Juneteenth is about all of a sudden us having a federal holiday where we talk about racial identity politics. They might as well call this the Ibram X. Kendi, Patrisse Cullors, or the Nicole Hannah-Jones 1619 Project holiday.
The writer of that article literally did not say that. He literally just made up those words. But in terms of reconciling race and politics, of course, because Juneteenth was based on a race of people, black people, getting freedom. And there is politics because they were freed by the government. The government is political. It's not difficult.
Well, actually, I think this is going to make America more racist. All of a sudden, we have an entire day that, first of all, the symbol of Juneteenth is the African flag, not the American flag. Don't believe me? Well, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, she actually shows, and listen to her statement right here. The African flag is now in Chicago instead of the American flag. Watch.
I, like many others, didn't even know anything about Juneteenth until I was an adult. And that's because it has never been treated with the reverence that it should be.
First of all, that wasn't the African flag. That was the Juneteenth flag. So he's wrong again as usual. Let's read this. The Juneteenth flag, you can look it up anywhere, features, and you see there in the picture, features red, white, and blue design with a central star, a bursting star outline, and a curved arc. Jump down. It says red, white, and blue matches the U.S. flag to show that enslaved people and their descendants are American citizens. So still acknowledging being American in America while celebrating the independence of black people in America. But further showing you that it's not an anti-American holiday like Kirk is trying to lie and say it is.
Is that actually going to help bring the country together? Is that actually going to help heal us? Is that going to harmonize our differences?
Why would it make a difference either way? Why would it harmonize or bring or not bring? Just don't be a jerk to anyone that's different from you. It's that simple.
You see, Abraham Lincoln said it the best at the Gettysburg Address. The reason we celebrate July 4th, 1776 was obviously because of the Declaration of Independence, where it says very clearly, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve political ties or bands connected with one another. And in there, they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Which that statement is a farce, because the majority of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence were slave owners. So they were saying, oh, white men were created equal, not all men, because black men were definitely not equal.
Boom! All men created equal. That's a big deal. And Abraham Lincoln, delivering the Gettysburg Address, November 19th, 1863, 272 words that changed the course of history, surrounded by carnage and not speaking for very long, Abraham Lincoln said, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. What is he saying? He was saying our founding was in July 4th, 1776.
And nobody is disputing that or has ever disputed that. But during the founding, black people in America were still in slavery and were not independent.
That was a big realization. Now, what happened in the year 1776? Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, and George Mason also passed the Virginia Bill of Rights, which put in the protection of these rights into Virginia, which eventually became the United States Constitutional Bill of Rights in 1791, 4 years after 1787. Now, the significance is this. Should we have a federal holiday based on color? That would be a bad idea. And why do we even need a competitor to July 4th? The summer used to have, the climax of the summer used to be that people, regardless of your skin color, your background, where you come from, you would celebrate July 4th and be proud of it. You would be proud of it for very good reason, because no matter where you come from, no matter what your belief is, we are all Americans on that day.
Holiday is
But now
not based
the
on
new
color. It's
symbol is
based
going to
on
be
culture
a
and history. And different cultural
day
groups
to
have
try
had different
to
history in the country. All the
say
cultural
that
groups
we wanna
haven't had the same
emphasize
history.
racial
That's number
identity
one.
politics.
Number two, no one is saying
I
that
want you
you
to ask
can't
yourself a
celebrate being
question
an
fairly.
American. Juneteenth,
Have you
we
ever
just
seen the
read
left
based on the
hijack
flag,
something for their use?
partially
Of
also
course, and they've
celebrates
already
black people
hijacked
being
this before.
American.
But now the new symbol is going to be a day to try to say that we want to emphasize racial identity politics.
It's not a day for that. He just made that part up. It's a day to celebrate the freedom or the independence of a people that was not independent on July 4th, 1776.
I want you to ask yourself a question fairly. Have you ever seen the left hijack something for their use? Of course, and they've already hijacked this before it's even started. In fact, we have members of Congress that are now singing the Black National Anthem. You didn't know we had a Black National Anthem? Well, we do. And they're trying to commemorate Juneteenth as part of that. You see, if we're serious about actually moving forward as a country on any sort of these issues, shouldn't we de-emphasize race and care more about someone's spirit or their soul and not their skin color?
Oh, now he doesn't want to talk about skin color? What a hypocrite this guy was.
These blacks trying to go rob her, happening all the time in urban America. Prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. That's a fact. Black crime is a major issue in our country. Why are you pushing criminal justice reform exactly? Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson, they're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Now, the southern border is, of course, the great replacement. They're trying to replace us demographically. They're trying to make the country less white. It is an anti-white agenda. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Forget the fact that in 1775, we had the first anti-slavery convention ever in the world held in Philadelphia. Right after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Vermont abolished slavery. Did you know that 9 states, by the time the United States Constitution was ratified in 1787, had already abolished slavery? So the slaves were starting to be freed actually during the ratification of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
That's fine, but for the billionth time, the entire South was riddled with slavery, and the majority of the United States was a slave area. That's why nobody celebrates that as a holiday like they do Juneteenth.
Is that really what's going to happen? We know what this is. No one's actually talking about the emancipation of slaves. Instead, they're talking about how racist and awful we are. Just go read the documents of why they think Juneteenth become a federal holiday. If things do not change, it's an imperative not to change them.
So I don't know if this is main character syndrome or just thinking that everything is about you because of who you are, the color of your skin, but who's saying how racist who is? The holiday is about the liberation of the black people in America. That's all it's about. Nobody's complaining about how racist anyone is. The generals and the Union Army that marched on the South, freeing slaves as they went, were comprised of white men. So how is this a racial attack against white people? This is what is actually celebrated. Remember, the best way to not be deceived, subjugated, and taken advantage of is to stay educated.